The next part is what Robbie was also referring to, receivables management. If a service is provided for cash, you get the revenue right away, which is great. However, healthcare, generally speaking, runs on credit. The service is provided and a third-party payer is billed, or the patient pays, and that would be the cash situation. But the overwhelming majority of healthcare services are paid for by a third party. So there's a receivable created. And receivables management then is extremely important in healthcare. Why? Because almost all the revenue comes from receivables. It's not a cash industry. Like McDonald's typically has a much higher percentage of its revenue from cash sales by people buying hamburgers right in the store. Healthcare, that just isn't the case. Almost all healthcare is provided on a credit basis. So therefore, receivables management is relatively more important in healthcare than it is in other industries. So let's just take an example here of how receivables accumulate. So we've got Valley Clinic here, who contracts with insurer, whose patients use $2,000 a day, and they pay in 20 days. So if I'm insured with this company and I go to Valley Clinic, the clinic will get paid for my use of this clinic 20 days from now. So therefore, starting today, over the next 20 days, it will accumulate receivables at a rate of $2,000 per day. After 20 days, the insurance company starts to pay for the patients that were treated 20 days ago. So essentially, after 20 days, the accounts receivable balance stabilizes at $40,000. Because at 21 days, I get another $2,000, but I'm also starting to pay someone who was in the clinic 21 days ago. So it's a moving target. So the $40,000, it stabilizes. Suppose Valley Clinic then will have, on average, in any one day, it'll have an accounts receivable balance from this insurance company of $40,000. Because on average, it's $2,000 a day, and then they take 20 days to pay. So Valley Clinic is essentially financing the insurance company's patients to the extent of $40,000. So the accounts receivable in this case is simply the average daily sales times the average collection period. $2,000 per day times 20 days is $40,000. So on its balance sheet, it will have accounts receivable, and 40,000 of that, on average, will be from this insurance company. Does everybody understand that arithmetic? So this clinic then will have those kinds of receivable balances for every different payer that it's got. And you add them all up, and that is the accounts receivable balance for that clinic. Receivables are not free. There is a carrying cost to them. If they've got $40,000 at any one time, and they have to pay 10% interest, on average, they're paying $4,000 a year in interest to finance those receivables from the insurance company. Because essentially, they are incurring costs, they are providing care to those insurance companies' patients, but they're waiting 20 days to get paid. That has a financial cost. Now just think about UNC for a second, or Duke, where they're saying $10 million a day of care to patients.
What exactly is this cost in form of? It's not an opportunity cost, is it? Is it actual cost?
It is, if they are financing this from a loan or a line of credit, it is an actual cost. Or you can look at it as an opportunity cost as well. If they're financing out of the cash in their bank account, they are foregoing the interest on that cash that they could have received in marketable securities. Instead of parking it in marketable securities, they're lending it to the insurance company because they're paying the expenses that have been incurred on behalf of the insurance company's patients, but they haven't got paid yet. So this is a critical notion. Accounts receivables have costs. They're not just an abstract financial concept that people just think, oh well, it's there with nothing we can do about it. Yeah, receivables are a revenue, right? They're carried on the balance sheet.
Yes, so you don't necessarily have to,
There's nothing about costs in the receivables. The costs, the expenses are on the income statement. As you know, the costs go on that you're a salaried nurse in this clinic. You get paid daily or weekly or whatever. Those costs they keep going on and on. Those are on the income statement. The receivable is on the balance sheet, which then gets transferred to the income statement when the actual cash is received. But in the receivables on the balance sheet, there's nothing in costs. There's gross accounts receivables, there's allowance for doubtful accounts, and there's net accounts receivable.
including these $20,000, there must be some portion to be counted as profit. And then you don't have to use that financing to finance your profit.
And I'm going to ask you to think about that and remember that for next week. That's a good point. That's one of the questions in the case. I won't go any further, but that's a good point. There's a question in the case about that.
So is the insurance company that you're waiting to collect your receivable from, are they purposely holding on to it longer so they can earn interest on it other than pay you quicker?
Absolutely. This is a game that healthcare organizations will pay with their insurance companies. You want to get your money as fast as possible. They want to pay as slowly as possible. And so you have to do a dance so that both of you have a reasonable, can keep in business. And you have to do the same, and we'll talk about this more in a second, with your providers, your suppliers. You buy IV solution, you buy med-surg supplies. You want to pay those bills as slowly as possible. The company that sold you those supplies wants their money as fast as possible. So you have to do a dance with them and come up with a time that is reasonable for you and is reasonable for them. And the reason this is happening is because receivables and payables have costs. Real costs. They're not abstract costs. There's a whole, I mean, I can't emphasize enough, there's a whole consulting industry out there. Hundreds, thousands of people who do nothing but go into healthcare organizations and give them revenue cycle advice. And the intent, the purpose is to minimize accounts receivable, accelerate the receipt of cash. That industry would not exist if there were not real costs associated with having accounts receivable. So how do we monitor receivables? Well, we want to closely monitor them, and I suspect, again, all of you, I'd be extremely surprised if within 1 year, 2 years after graduating, you haven't seen at least some form of aging schedule or other schedule to monitor receivables. But you want to make sure you're doing it, you're monitoring it to make sure you get your money as fast as possible and to minimize your bad debt losses. So two common ways of doing this is through the average collection period and aging schedules. And I'll show you an aging schedule, a real one, in just a minute. And healthcare, this is particularly complex because we're going to do it by payer. So some of the problems faced by healthcare providers, the billing complexities, what does that mean?
Different payers have different systems and different requirements, so they're all difficult.
I mean, Eric's right. You have the same, exactly the same service. Different payers will have different forms to fill out. They'll even call it different things. There'll be different conditions under which your claims can be denied. So exactly the same service. Compare that to a car dealership. You buy a Corolla. It's the same price to everybody. They don't go through different billing systems for every different customer. I mean, this package is essentially the same. They might be able to negotiate a better price, but the basic product is still the same. Everybody agrees it's a Corolla. That's not the same thing in healthcare. No two patients are the same. All the different insurers have got different billing needs and complexities. Multiple payers, different rules and regulations. Sometimes UNC Healthcare, for example, will have some managed care patients. They'll have some prospective payment, some per diem, occasionally some bundled payment. We're going to see a big expansion of bundled payment under health reform. All those kinds of different payment methods. So exactly the same patients could be being paid with entirely different payment mechanisms. Credit policy, let me just skip out of this for a second and show you how we monitor accounts receivable to show you what a real life one looks like. I don't know how to get rid of this thing on the right. Do you know how to do that?
That's that X on the top right below the letter.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's going to get rid of the whole file.
Just click tools. Click tools again.
Thank you. Okay, so here is how we count. Here's our accounts receivable. We do it by payer. So here are the patients who are self-pay, again by whether they're medical or dental, private insurance, Medicaid, Medicare, our total accounts receivable by month, May, June, July, all the way down to October. So what do we do with that? Well, the next thing we get worried about, and I'm going to have to go back to allowance for doubtful accounts. So here are our accounts receivable by payer. This is estimated uncollectible. So how would you interpret that in line? 30%, 30%, 50%, 100%. What does that mean? In fact, if a bill is 91 days old, what do we think? We're never going to get paid. These numbers, those percentages, are based on our historical experience. All of you will work for organizations that have got different experiences. This is patient pay, so these are pretty high default rates. But what this means is that of all that we had $115,000 in accounts receivable generated during the current month, we think we're going to get 30% of that, or 70% of that. The same with 30 days, between 30 and 60 days. By the time 60 days rolls around, we're going to get maybe half, and if after 90 days, we think we're not going to get anything. I mean, generally, it does go up and down. It's not constant, but those are the kinds of percentages we see. So what do you notice about Medicaid? And Medicare? I mean, in terms of the estimated uncollectibles. Yeah. So what that shows is that we have much lower uncollectible rates among Medicare and Medicaid. There's a higher probability we're going to get paid from those sources compared to patient pay. And then private insurance, again, is higher than Medicare and Medicaid. So people like to trash Medicaid and Medicare, but in fact for us, they're much better payers. We get a higher proportion of that payment than we do in private insurance or certainly in self-pay. So again, these percentages that are along here, 23, 25, 50, these are all based on historical experience, but this stuff is deadly serious. This is what finance committees of healthcare organizations spend their time monitoring. because there's the cost of bad debt and the cost of receivables is non-trivial.